The hearing would last 47 minutes, but the moment Bridget Harrison realized her career wasn't over, that took exactly 8 seconds. 8 seconds for the family's attorney to press play on the recording. 8 seconds of a child's voice, clear and steady, saying words that made the licensing board go absolutely silent. But that was 3 months from now. Right now, Bridget was sitting across from her supervisor's supervisor, watching her professional life disintegrate in real time. Your emotional involvement with the Lawson case has compromised your objectivity, Eleanor Chambers said, sliding a termination letter across the desk. Effective immediately. You're being removed from all active cases and placed on administrative review, pending investigation. Bridget had been a social worker for 9 years. Child Welfare Division. She'd walked into homes where kids slept in closets, where meals meant whatever someone remembered to leave out, where bruises had explanations that changed every time you asked. She'd learned to document everything, to stay professional, to separate her heart from her job, because the work required clear eyes and steady hands. And now she was being fired for caring too much. The Lawson children are in danger, Bridget said, keeping her voice level despite the rage building in her chest. I documented 12 separate incidents. Your documentation is the problem, Eleanor interrupted. Your reports read like advocacy, not assessment. Bridget had grown up in foster care, 5 different placements between ages 7 and 16, after her father went to prison, and her mother's addiction made her unsafe. Some homes had been fine adequate food, clean beds, adults who did the minimal. One had been genuinely good, a couple who saw her, who asked about her day, who showed up at her school events even though the state only paid them $600 a month. But 2 placements had been terrible. Neglect that went unreported because the social worker did. 15-minute check-ins and accepted whatever the foster parent said. Emotional abuse that Bridget learned to hide because complaining meant getting moved again, and moving meant new schools, new losses, and new efforts to make herself small enough to be tolerable. She'd become a social worker because she remembered what it felt like to be invisible. To have adults make decisions about your life without really seeing you. To know something was wrong, but have no one believe you. She'd put herself through college, state school, scholarships, and student loans she was still paying off at 32. Got her MSW from a program that emphasized trauma-informed care. Built a reputation as someone who took the hard cases, who visited more than the required monthly check-ins, who actually talked to kids instead of just their guardians. The Lawson case had been assigned to her 4 months ago. 3 children, Destany, age 12, Michael, age 9, and Aisha, age 6, were placed with their maternal aunt, Cheryl Lawson, after their mother entered a long-term rehabilitation program. The placement seemed stable initially. Nice suburban house. Cheryl was employed, had no criminal record, and passed the background check. But Bridget had learned to trust her instincts, and her instincts said something was wrong. The children were too quiet, too careful. Destiny watched her aunt's face before answering any questions. Michael flinched when adults moved too quickly. Aisha had stopped talking almost entirely. The first incident report came after a home visit, when Bridget noticed Michael had lost weight, not the gradual change of a growth spurt, but the hollow-cheeked look of a child who wasn't eating enough. She documented it. Requested a follow-up medical evaluation. Cheryl had explanations ready. Michael was a picky eater. He'd had a stomach bug. She was working with a pediatrician. The second report came after. Destiny showed up to their private check-in with a burn mark on her forearm. I grabbed a hot pan by accident, she'd said. The words practiced, her eyes locked on the floor. Burns from hot pans didn't wrap around forearms in perfect circles. Bridget documented it. Requested an investigation. Cheryl provided photos of the kitchen, pointed out the pan in question, and made Destiny repeat her story while Bridget's supervisor took notes. The third, fourth, and fifth reports came over the next 2 months. Aisha's regression in speech. Destiny's falling grades. Michael's increasing anxiety. Each time, Bridget documented everything, recommended increased monitoring, suggested family therapy, and support services. Each time, Cheryl Lawson had answers, had explanations, had a lawyer who sent professionally worded letters about harassment and bias. You're targeting my client because she's a single woman caring for her sister's children, the lawyer wrote. Ms. Lawson has cooperated fully with every inquiry. The children are healthy, housed, and attending school regularly. Your continued interference constitutes harassment. Bridget's supervisor started questioning her judgment. The medical exams don't show abuse. The children aren't reporting anything. You're seeing problems that aren't there. They're scared to report, Bridget had argued. Destiny told me directly that her aunt gets angry when she talks to me. That's not normal. Destiny is 12. She's probably struggling with the fact that her mother isn't there. You're reading trauma into typical adolescent behavior, but Bridget knew the difference. She'd lived the difference. This wasn't adolescent moodiness. This was survival behavior. These children were managing adult emotions, monitoring adult reactions, and making themselves small to avoid consequences. The breaking point came during a mandatory family meeting. Cheryl Lawson sat with her arms crossed, face set in an expression of patient martyrdom. The children sat in a careful line on the couch, hands folded, eyes down. "I understand Ms. Harrison has concerns," Cheryl said, her voice carrying just the right notes of hurt and confusion. "But I love these children. I've opened my home, rearranged my entire life to care for them, while my sister gets help. And instead of support, I'm being treated like a criminal." Bridget's supervisor, Patricia Reynolds, nodded sympathetically. "We appreciate everything you're doing, Ms. Lawson. Bridget, do you have specific new concerns to address?" Bridget looked at the children. At Destiny's rigid posture, at Michael's shallow breathing, at Aisha's absolute stillness, yes. I'm concerned about the children's emotional well-being. I'm concerned about the pattern of injuries and weight loss. I'm concerned about the way they monitor their aunt's reactions before speaking. I'm recommending immediate placement review. The room went cold. Cheryl's lawyer leaned forward. "That's a serious allegation. Do you have evidence of abuse?" "I have documented observations across 4 months. Observations aren't evidence," the lawyer interrupted. "You have personal interpretations of normal childhood behavior. You've conducted what amounts to a harassment campaign against my client based on nothing but your feelings." Bridget felt her face flush. Your professional assessment has been questioned by your own supervisor," the lawyer continued. "We've been patient with this situation, but Ms. Lawson has rights. These children have stability, and you're threatening that stability because you've decided without evidence that something must be wrong." The meeting ended with Bridget being removed from the case. 3 days later, she was placed on administrative review. A week after that, she was terminated. The official reason? Excessive emotional involvement, compromising professional objectivity. Bridget cleaned out her desk on a Tuesday afternoon. 9 years of case files, training certificates, thank you notes from families she'd helped. It all fit in 2 boxes. Her colleague Tiana Brooks hugged her in the parking lot. "This is wrong. Everyone knows you're the best advocate we have. Apparently that's the problem. What are you going to do?" Bridget looked back at the building, the place where she'd thought she was making a difference, where she tried to be the social worker she'd needed as a kid. "I don't know, but I can't stop thinking about those children. You can't contact them. You'll violate the termination terms, I know." But 3 weeks after her termination, Bridget's phone rang. Unknown number. "Ms. Harrison. This is Destiny Lawson." The voice was quiet but steady. "I need to tell you something, but I need you not to interrupt until I'm done, okay?" Bridget's heart hammered. "Destiny, I'm not supposed to, please. Just listen." So Bridget listened. Destiny talked for 47 minutes. She described systematic emotional abuse, her aunt's rage when children cried, her use of food restriction as punishment, her threats about sending them back to foster care if they complained. She described how her aunt coached them before visits, how she punished Destiny for being too friendly with Bridget, how she'd isolated them from their school counselors and friends. "I recorded some of it," Destiny said. "On my phone. I didn't know who else to tell. Michael said you were the only adult who really looked at us. Like you could see what was happening even when we couldn't say it. Destiny, you need to report this too." "I already did. I called Child Protective Services yesterday. I gave them everything. But they said that because you were removed from our case, your reports got dismissed. They said the new worker doesn't see any problems. They're not going to do anything unless someone believes us." Bridget closed her eyes. Professional protocol said she should direct Destiny to her current caseworker. Professional protocol said she was no longer involved, that reaching out could violate termination terms, that her career was already finished, and this could make it worse. But professional protocol had also said these children were fine. "Send me the recordings," Bridget said. "Give me 24 hours. Bridget spent that night documenting everything. She created a comprehensive timeline, her original reports, the dates of each incident, Cheryl Lawson's explanations, and the supervisor meetings where her concerns were dismissed. She cross-referenced it with Destiny's account. With the recordings that showed a woman who performed stability for outsiders while terrorizing children behind closed doors, the recordings were devastating. Cheryl Lawson's voice cold and controlled. "You think you're going to tell that social worker about this? You know what happens to kids who lie about their families? Foster care? Real foster care, where nobody gives a damn about you." Michael's quiet crying is in the background. Isha's silence. Bridget had been right. She'd been right about all of it, and they'd fired her for it. She thought about every time she'd been told she was too emotional, too invested, too personally affected by her cases. She thought about the implicit accusation beneath those words, that growing up in foster care made her biased rather than informed, that her lived experience was a liability rather than expertise. She'd spent 9 years trying to prove she could be objective, professional, appropriately detached. She'd learned the language of assessment reports, had mastered the neutral tone that described horror in passive voice. She'd made herself palatable to supervisors, would never spend a night wondering if the adults in charge actually cared whether you lived or died. And the moment she'd advocated too loudly for children who couldn't advocate for themselves, she'd been silenced. Her phone buzzed. A text from her former colleague, Tiana. Heard Destiny called CPS? You involved? Bridget stared at the message, admitting. Involvement meant confirming she'd violated termination terms. It meant any chance of getting her job back disappeared completely. It meant her social work license could be suspended or revoked. But Destiny Lawson had trusted her, had risked everything to reach out because she believed Bridget was the only adult who'd actually seen her. Bridget texted back, yes, I have recordings.
What do I do with them?
3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Give them to the licensing board. File a formal complaint against the department for mishandling the case. I'll testify about what I witnessed. This is bigger than your job now. It's about proving the system failed those kids. Bridget filed the complaint on a Monday morning. Attached are the recordings, her original reports, the timeline, and a 15-page analysis of how the department's failure to act had endangered 3 children. She included a personal statement. I was told I was too emotional to remain objective, but objectivity without compassion is just another word for complicity. These children needed someone who cared enough to keep looking, even when it was inconvenient, even when it made supervisors uncomfortable. That's not a professional failing. That's the job. The licensing board scheduled an emergency hearing. The department sent 2 lawyers and Eleanor Chambers. Cheryl Lawson came with her attorney, her face a mask of wounded dignity and destiny. Lawson came with her siblings, accompanied by their mother, recently released from rehab, and a child advocate attorney Bridget had never met. The hearing officer, a woman named Judge Carolyn Bishop, looked at the assembled parties with a kind of expression that suggested she'd seen too many of these cases and hadn't liked what she'd learned. Ms. Harrison, you've made serious allegations against the Department of Child Services regarding the Lawson case. The department maintains that you were removed for cause due to inappropriate emotional involvement. What evidence do you have to refute that assessment? Bridget nodded to Destiny's attorney, who pressed play. The courtroom filled with Cheryl Lawson's voice. Cold, controlled, threatening children with abandonment, with foster care, with consequences for speaking up. 40 minutes of recordings that made Eleanor Chambers go pale, made the department lawyers exchange worried glances, made Cheryl Lawson's attorney lean over and whisper urgent consultations. Judge Bishop let the entire recording play. When it finished, she turned to Destiny. Ms. Lawson, did you record these interactions yourself? Yes, ma'am. Destiny's voice was steady. Because Ms. Harrison told me once that I had a voice. I was allowed to use it. And she was the only person who listened when I did. Judge Bishop looked at Eleanor Chambers. Ms. Chambers, when Ms. Harrison reported concerns about this placement, what steps did your department take to investigate? Eleanor shuffled papers. We conducted standard wellness checks, interviewed the children, consulted with medical professionals. There was no evidence of physical abuse. What about the burn mark on Destiny Lawson's arm? It was determined to be accidental. By whom? Silence. Ms. Chambers, I'm looking at Ms. Harrison's reports. She documented 12 separate incidents over 4 months. She requested medical evaluations, psychological assessments, and increased monitoring. What part of that strikes you as unprofessional? Tone of her reports suggested predetermined conclusions rather than objective assessment. The tone, Judge Bishop's voice went very quiet. You removed a social worker from a case because you didn't like her tone, while children were being emotionally abused. Destiny's mother, Rochelle Lawson, stood up. May I speak? Judge Bishop nodded. I'm an addict, Rochelle said, her voice clear despite shaking hands. I made terrible choices that put my children at risk. I went to rehab because I wanted to be the mother they deserved. The whole time I was gone, I thought they were safe, thought my sister was taking care of them. She looked at Cheryl, who wouldn't meet her eyes. When Destiny called me 2 weeks ago, crying, telling me what was happening, I didn't believe her at first. I thought she was just upset that I wasn't there. But she played me the recordings. I realized that Ms. Harrison had been trying to protect my children while I was learning to protect myself. Rochelle turned to Bridget. You saw them, really saw them, even when nobody else would. The department lawyer cleared his throat. Your Honor, Ms. Harrison violated termination protocols by maintaining contact with she violated protocols. To protect children who were being failed by the very system meant to keep them safe, Judge Bishop interrupted. I'm ordering an immediate investigation into the Department of Child Services handling of this case. I'm recommending that Ms. Harrison's termination be overturned with full back pay and reinstatement. And I'm mandating external oversight of all active cases pending review. She looked at Eleanor Chambers. In this profession, being too emotional about child welfare isn't a flaw. It's proof you're still doing the job correctly. Perhaps if more of your staff cared as much as Ms. Harrison, we wouldn't be sitting in this hearing. Eleanor's face went white. Judge Bishop turned to Bridget. Ms. Harris, the children want to say something to you? If you're willing to hear it? Bridget nodded, not trusting her voice. Michael came forward first. You believed us. Even when we couldn't say the words, you knew something was wrong. Thank you for not giving up. Aisha handed her a drawing. 3 children holding hands with a woman whose name tag said Bridget. You're brave, Aisha whispered. The first words Bridget had heard her speak in months, and Destiny simply said, You taught me I was worth fighting for. I hope you know you are too. Bridget returned to work 6 weeks later. The Department of Child Services had undergone significant restructuring. Eleanor Chambers had been reassigned to administrative duties without direct case oversight. Patricia Reynolds had retired early. 3 new protocols had been implemented, requiring external review when social workers reported ongoing concerns that supervisors dismissed. The Lawson children were placed back with their mother, now 18 months sober and working with a family support team. Cheryl Lawson faced criminal charges for child endangerment and was prohibited from foster placements. The investigation had revealed 2 previous cases where children in her care had made similar complaints that were dismissed. On her first day back, she found letters on her desk, dozens of them, from former clients, from colleagues, from families she'd worked with over 9 years, all saying some version of the same thing. Thank you for caring when it wasn't convenient. Thank you for seeing us. Tiana stopped by her desk at lunch. You're kind of a hero around here now. How does it feel? Bridget thought about the 3 months of unemployment. The nights she'd wondered if she'd made a catastrophic mistake, the constant second-guessing of every choice. It feels like I did what I was supposed to do, and I shouldn't be exceptional for that. But you are. That's the problem. A new case file landed on Bridget's desk that afternoon. A family of 4, recent placement with relatives, routine monitoring required. She opened it and started reading, making notes in the margins, already planning her first visit. Her supervisor, a new hire named Dr. Marcus Grant, who built a reputation for supporting frontline workers, stopped by her office. Harrison, I want you to know I read everything about your case. Your approach is exactly what we need more of here. If you ever feel like your concerns aren't being heard, you come directly to me. Understood? Understood? Good, because caring about these kids isn't a weakness. It's the whole point. Bridget smiled. Finally, someone got it. She'd been called too emotional for seeing what others wouldn't. But emotion wasn't the opposite of professionalism. Sometimes it was the only thing that made professionalism worth anything. Sometimes caring too much was exactly enough.